In the thousands of hours I've spent watching videos on YouTube, one of the most ubiquitously engaging types of video I've come across are the investigative pieces about the many unsolved mysteries of the internet. Strange tales of impossibly deep conspiracies like Eritas, or of secret societies and cults conscripting new members like Cicada 3301 or Kanye Quest have become classics of this trend, but considering the sheer size of the internet, there's a practically unlimited supply of these mysteries as more and more spring up every day. Today, I'd like to talk about one of those mysteries, one that probably doesn't go as deep as those classics, but it should still be quite interesting. I typically don't make this sort of video, but I realized that this story in particular could easily fade into total obscurity without a proper recounting of its history, and it just so happens to relate to a game I've been very interested in for about 10 years now. r/Fez is a subreddit dedicated to discussion of the 2012 cult classic indie game Fez, and in its early years, there were 3 accounts which stood out for their mysterious activity. Many that were around to witness their posts would dub them false prophets, but in order to understand why, we'll have to go through their strange, intertwining histories. In doing so, we may be able to better understand a fourth, possibly non-existent figure that is even more mysterious. As a preface to this history lesson, you may already know me as the guy who made this video about Fez, which is about Fez as a game and the history of its own unsolved mysteries within the confines of the game itself. The timeline of when and how the most cryptic puzzles in the game were solved is important for the context of this video, so I'm going to be retreading some ground from my previous video in a more condensed, less dramatic way here, so please bear with me if you're already familiar with that history. Fez released on April 13th, 2012 on Xbox Live Arcade to an eager player base that had been following the game's development. Players were quickly able to discover the game's many secrets and solve most of its puzzles within the first few days of its release, but there was one puzzle that seemed impossible. Like most other puzzles in the game, this one involved inputting a secret code using the D-pad, left and right triggers, and the jump button. But unlike most other puzzles in the game, after causing this black rectangular shape to appear out of the ground by inputting a code, there was a second code which simply could not be found anywhere. This infamous puzzle has been dubbed the Monolith, due to the black shape's similarity to the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Rather than being solved normally, this puzzle was instead brute forced by members of the Fez GameFAQs board, which allowed players to obtain the final collectible and achieve the final completion percentage of 209.4%. Even though it was technically solved, the monolith is still the main driving force of discussion around Fez because of how it was brute forced rather than being solved in a more reasonable manner, as it's still not entirely clear how the developers intended it to be solved even 13 years after the game's release. Our first character in this story actually appears surprisingly soon after the initial release of the game, though it didn't relate directly to r/Fez at first. The subreddit was around even at this early stage, but for now we have to look to an odd YouTube account that went by the name OwlEffigy. The first video on this account was uploaded not even 2 weeks after Fez's release, on April 24th, 2012. Since YouTube doesn't have the same discoverability within specific communities that Reddit provides, this YouTube account was only discovered when OwlEffigy began to post cryptic comments under various Let's Plays of Fez. This led people to look at the channel itself, and they found similarly cryptic content in OwlEffigy's uploads. OwlEffigy would post 4 videos in a little over a year, culminating in Merd, or Dream spelled backwards, on May 5th, 2013. This YouTube channel has been silent since then, as far as I can tell. There would be attempts to figure out exactly what OwlEffigy's deal was, but in part due to the small size of the community, they didn't go anywhere. But it was around the time of that final video's release that another important event occurred. which is the release of Fez's PC port on May 1st, 2013. This was important because it opened up the game to a relatively painless method of data mining, which would result in the discovery of another unsolvable puzzle. On May 3rd, just 2 days after the game's release on PC, the first thread about this new secret was opened on GameFAQs. The post said that if you have a fully completed save file and go to the final heart fountain room, you can input 2 separate codes while viewing the letter and number artifacts respectively to trigger a secret event, which is a method never used in any other puzzle or even hinted at being possible anywhere in the game. I'll be calling this secret by one of its most common names as given by the community: Heartbreak. With the new discoveries that came along with the PC port, there was a new burst of activity in the Fez community, which brings us to r/Fez. The subreddit's members would soon be visited by a seemingly familiar character and the first of our 3 accounts, OwlEffigy. This account was made on June 19th, 2013, and it immediately made a post which appears to hold little of substance, just offering a seemingly platitudinous point of advice. Sometimes we become so involved in the journey, we forget where we came from. There would be bits of speculation on what this could mean, as well as what the seemingly nonsensical title of the post might mean, but relative to the gaps in time between the uploads on the OwlEffigy YouTube channel, this Reddit account would be much more active. 4 days later, another post was made, this time with a title written in Morse code and a body written in binary. The title translates to "hoot hoot hoot," and the body translates to "ashes, a broken key, a first step, a positive, a negative." Again, seemingly nonsensical and platitudinous messages that seem to fit alongside those previous videos. But OwlEffigy's next post would be different, and in a way that would let their cryptic mask slip. Another 4 days passed, and OwlEffigy posted Fez and straight-up advice. There were no codes or fortune cookie-esque messages, and we instead got what was seemingly a better look at the person behind this account. They tell the tale of how they first tried to figure out the monolith on their own, before going online and finding that it was brute forced. Then, after a few months, they returned to the game and, allegedly, found the solution that the community was looking for. The rest of this post, as its title implies, is not what that solution is, but rather advice on how to find that solution. Aside from that, there are 2 more interesting things about this post. Firstly, the first paragraph is about another post on the subreddit documenting how the game's ending changes when the player only collected anti-cubes, which are the collectibles that are hidden behind the game's second layer of puzzles. Doing this appeared to cause a change in the game's ending, but this was actually a red herring caused by a bug, as confirmed by the developers. What's more interesting about this is the account that made this post, FrostDogger, an account which would, a little over 2 weeks later on July 8th, make this infamous post, the release date theory for the monolith. This was practically an unofficial solution to the puzzle for years, until it was debunked by the game's developers in 2019. Maybe this is the same solution that OwlEffigy came across, or maybe OwlEffigy's claims spurred FrostDogger on to look deeper and find this hypothetical solution. Regardless of how it happened, it's interesting to think about. But what's more odd about OwlEffigy's post is how exactly it's written. This post is littered with bits of broken English and generally odd stylings in its writing, which doesn't necessarily lead to any conclusions on its own, but some onlookers notice similarities to the writings of a very important person, Phil Fish, the infamous lead developer of Fez. There was already speculation that the OwlEffigy YouTube channel was part of an ARG set up by the Fez developers, and even though this post seemed to disprove that theory, others still subscribe to it since OwlEffigy never explicitly said they weren't Phil. This piece of speculation essentially became a conspiracy theory for the members of the community, and it carried forward into the future to the point where I included it in this iceberg chart I made for Fez as the very final entry over 7 years after OwlEffigy's appearance on the subreddit. That's where I'll cut this discussion short for now, but this theory will continue to come up as our other characters reveal themselves. OwlEffigy would stop posting for a while after this, so it's time to introduce our next character. About 2 months after OwlEffigy's advice post, on August 3rd, a new account called PolybiusCube was created and quickly made a post to r/Fez titled List of Every Unexplained Thing in Fez. There are many posts like this compiling the game's critical mysteries that remain unsolved, but this post specifically had a few things written before the simple list of topics. First is redacted written in square brackets, but then there are 4 unique characters, 3 of which have links attached to them. The first links to an image of a QR code, which when scanned reads, "You are thinking too hard." The second links to a single track on the music distribution service Bandcamp, uploaded under an account of the same name, which contains a message when the track is put through a spectrogram. "Can you see yet?" The third and final link is to another image with a much clearer message. "Fez, our gift to you." Even more interesting is what significance these 4 symbols have, as they're not only found within Fez on various walls in the opposite order, but they can also be found in the exact same layout in the About section of the OwlEffigy YouTube channel. At the same time as this post, PolybiusCube also posted to r/haiku, which is relevant to Fez as a game, since haikus appear in the game, written in the game's fictional language in the tome artifact. This haiku reads, "Beyond the Between, a ritual transmission, lost between 2 worlds." Since these posts were made in the same day, which is also the day the account itself was created, it's hard not to draw a connection between both of PolybiusCube's posts, as well as OwlEffigy, since the creation of both accounts seemed similar. The name of the account was also interesting, as Polybius could feasibly be referring to the infamous urban legend of the MKUltra-esque arcade machine, or it could refer to Polybius squares, which is a very primitive form of alphabetical encryption invented in ancient Greece. Discussion about this account spilled out into other threads around this time as well, just based on 3 simple sentences, a haiku, and the idea that maybe PolybiusCube was saying or would eventually say something of significance to Fez's ongoing mysteries. PolybiusCube would be the least active account following their arrival, as they would now fall silent for the next couple months, meaning it's now time to introduce our third, final, and most interesting account. On August 26th, a Reddit account called Phonolith would make its first of many posts onto r/Fez as soon as it was created, just like OwlEffigy and PolybiusCube did. This first post was of a QR code with a creepy 6-eyed Zooish person standing in the top left of the code. For reference, if you've never played Fez, Zoo is the name of the civilization which predated the player character's village, the denizens of which look nearly identical to the player character's race, except with larger heads. None of them have 6 eyes in the game, however, and the only things in the game that have more than 2 eyes are the depictions of the aliens found after going through the Stargate and the Skull artifact. Whatever the point of this 6-eyed character is, if you blank out its silhouette and scan the QR code, it simply says Fez. This first post could be seen as a simple art piece, since QR codes are used in Fez itself, but the post's odd title, combined with the knowledge of the 2 other strange accounts from this time, made people believe it was at least a little more than that. It only took 2 days for Phonolith to post again, which actually came with 2 posts in a single day. The first was a Morse code message, translating to a binary string which translated to simply help. The second doesn't appear to have anything hidden within it at first glance, though its artistic intention is clear, as you can see things like numbers written in the Zooish number system and the game's 3rd dimension symbol, all within the outline of the pixelated Fez from the game. However, this image does actually hide a QR code if you take the time to recolor everything, remove the 3rd dimension symbols, and change the corners back to the typical markers found in QR codes. The message this code gives reads, 8 is beyond 4, 9 is the light tunnel, black is the monolith. Seeing as how this was still relatively soon after the game was released, rumors that these 3 accounts were either Phil Fish or another developer that worked on Fez trying to give hints for the game's still unsolved mysteries continued to stir in the comments under these posts, though others simply appreciated the interesting visuals. But while everything that came before this could be seen as simple, low-effort bait posts attempting to drum up forced mystery, after another 2 days, Phonolith would post what they called a gift, a Dropbox link that provided something decidedly more intricate. This gift was a single file called cmd.swf, with cmd being the abbreviation for the basic command prompt program in Windows, and SWF files being an extension used by the now-defunct Adobe Flash Player, which stores data for things like Flash animations or games. Although the original Dropbox link will now send you to a 404 page, I've archived the original file, which is linked in the description if you'd like to try it out for yourself. You can download an archived version of the Adobe Flash Player program and load the file to see how far you can get, or just continue watching since I'll be going through everything found within this file. If you do decide to try it for yourself, make sure you type help to get some understanding of how to interact with the program, and use the comments under the Reddit post to help guide you, since you can't reasonably access the deeper parts of the puzzle without the additional guidance that was provided there. As the name of the file alludes to, your main way of interacting with the program is by typing commands, for which the help command is a good start. Most of this information isn't very important, but n equals 10 minus 3 should be kept in mind for something very soon. What is important at the start is the monolith command, which shows a dark rectangle in the middle of the screen when input. From here, typing /monolith rotate reveals that this rectangle is a 3D object that can be rotated, which when done twice will reveal a QR code. /monolith rotate y will flip this QR code right side up, which will display what seems to be gibberish when scanned. There is a message here, but it's encrypted with a Caesar cipher, which is a very basic form of encryption, where all the letters are shifted forward by a set number of letters in alphabetical order. Although the knowledge that this message is encrypted this way allows you to easily decrypt it through trial and error, the final line of the help command is the key. 10 minus 3 equals 7, so by applying a shift of 7, the following message is revealed. Retrocausality, the spirit of the journey. Find the engraved wood, magnetic anomaly. The first user to post this full solution under Phonolith's post was a user named 123ZC, which prompted a reply from Phonolith, which was again a Caesar cipher with a different shift value. The comment contained a link at the end that provided a new shift value in Fez's own number system, 10 plus 3 equals 13. Using that value, this message reads, "Reply me with the words monolith in cipher, I'll be waiting." Others would try to reply to this comment using the same cipher, but Phonolith made it clear that they were waiting for 123ZC specifically to reply. It took about 7 hours for this to happen, though 123ZC decided to send it encoded in base 64, which Phonolith would follow with their reply, "Type your name in the CMD." At this point, Phonolith presumably updated the Dropbox link with a new version, as typing the name 123ZC into the version I've archived presents something new. The six-eyed Zooish person returns, which now introduces itself as Phonolith. Typing help here gives a better idea of what this section of the program provides. This is my AMA to you. Typing AMA will clarify that you can only ask things that are coded into the program, so at this point it's a matter of asking the right questions. Although some would try to find the questions on their own at the time, decompiling SWF files is quite easy, so I'll be exhaustively highlighting the most interesting answers now. A good first question is, "Who are you?" To which Phonolith responds, "It does not matter who I am." Another important question on many people's minds was, "Are you Phil Fish?" which Phonolith denies. Asking, "Why are you doing this?" gives an interesting response, because things are not happening the way they should. Another interesting response is to the question, "How did you code this?" which doesn't really go answered, though the simple clarification "we" is given. Why 6 eyes may not give an especially pertinent answer, though it is an intriguing one. 2 eyes for the peripheral, 4 eyes for the ethereal, 6 eyes for the metaphysical. However, you are able to ask Phonolith about a few more specific things. Asking, "What do the numbers mean?" prompts the response, "Not everything has a meaning, but the numbers do." Though this could easily be a reference to a famous scene from the first Call of Duty Black Ops game, there are 2 more questions that ask about more pertinent things. Since the message on the backside of the monolith tells you to find the engraved wood, you can ask Phonolith, "What is the engraved wood?" which returns another message that appears to be encoded with another Caesar cipher, though no shift value provides anything readable. Instead, this message is actually a cryptogram, where each letter corresponds to another arbitrary letter that must be derived from what certain words are most likely to be, and other patterns in the lengths of words. You can also find solvers for cryptograms on the internet that use dictionaries to brute force through every possible word if you can't be bothered to figure it out yourself, which can be used here to reveal the encoded message. It's not that simple. You used the heart reboot. You peaked where you should not have. This is, of course, referring to the Heartbreak secret that was data mined after Fez's PC port was released, which suggests that Phonolith is disapproving of how the community discovered this secret, while sidestepping the question about whatever the engraved wood is. Additionally, another more specific question you can ask is, what is the light tunnel, referring back to the QR code hidden in the Fez that was posted a couple days ago, though Phonolith also sidesteps this question by responding, not allowed to really talk about that. By the way, molten metal. What molten metal is referring to isn't clear now, but it comes up again very soon. The last and probably most important thing to do here is type AMA rotate, which causes the speech bubble to rotate similarly to the monolith before and reveal both a QR code and what looks like another code split into pieces. The first code, when horizontally flipped, will say, "You're pretty smart." The second code would be far more difficult to decipher, though eventually, user Lydian Alchemist would go through the trouble of figuring out how all the pieces fit together in a process you can pause to read about. But when this new code is scanned, it says, "This is one of those things that don't mean anything." It seems a bit anticlimactic, but after several hours, Phonolith would reply to this comment with another base64 encoded message, along with an update to the file, asking Lydian Alchemist to type their name this time. Typing in Lydian Alchemist during the AMA section causes this new depiction of Phonolith to appear, along with the only use of audio in the program, which is lifted from 2001: A Space Odyssey. The only thing that seems to be hidden in this image is a QR code, which when translated using a shift value of 11 for a Caesar cipher reads, "Nothing is for nothing. Molten metal flowed through the streets." Some speculation would be made on what the light tunnel, engraved wood, or molten metal could possibly be referring to with respect to Fez, though the last thing I want to highlight is found deep within a chain of comments on some of that speculation. Lydian Alchemist was seemingly annoyed after reportedly spending hours putting together the broken QR code, only to be told it didn't mean anything, which prompted a comment calling Phonolith a simple troll that was stringing everyone along with vague phrases and promises of lore that would bait speculation. Surprisingly, Phonolith would respond to this comment in a way that essentially broke character, and not just because the text within wasn't encoded in any way. This comment reads, "Dude, don't be such a downer. And why are you concentrating so hard on completing Fez? All this time I've been emphasizing the journey you take, not the completion. Did you just play Fez to get a high percentage score, or did you play it to experience the puzzles and environments? Sure, unlocking stuff is fun, but it should never be the aim of a player. If my message still hasn't gotten to you guys, I have really failed as a puzzle designer." Lydian Alchemist would respond with an apology of sorts, though whether it was because of this comment or simply because they were out of puzzles for now, Phonolith wouldn't update their program again. Ultimately, I'm sympathetic to the complaint over a lot of this puzzle being vague and not particularly satisfying on its own, though there was nothing indicating that this would be the final word from Phonolith. But maybe leaving these questions entirely open would be preferable to Phonolith, given their stated philosophy of emphasizing the journey you take, not the completion. In fact, we can actually quite confidently derive Phonolith's philosophy on Fez through what was said in the AMA, with the condemnations of how the community discovered the Heartbreak secret and their claim that things are not happening the way they should. But in terms of tangible connections to Fez's own mysteries, for now, the members of r/Fez would just have to wait to see if this foundation would be expanded upon. After Phonolith's gift, there would be a gap in activity from our 3 accounts, though in the middle of this gap was a small update from PolybiusCube. This came in the form of a comment under the post of a user who claimed to have reached full completion of Fez without any outside help, which is an extraordinary claim solely because of the monolith. Under a reply where the OP explained how they got past the monolith, PolybiusCube returned with another haiku. "Uncertain answers, lost within the ratio, find the equation." There's a lot of speculation that could be made based on this comment, some of which was made by a user who replied to it, but at the same time there's not really much to definitively pull from a short, vague comment like this. It's probably not very important, but it's still important to mention for completeness. The period of relative silence would last about 5 months, only ending on January 30th, 2014, when Phonolith returned with a new post. Attached was an image of a seemingly nonsensical spread of multicolored pixels, with the word vector written below it. Although it may seem like nothing at first, this is actually all the information required to create a unique QR code, which is achieved here by simply adding the square markers in the corners. When scanned, this QR code simply reads "reboot," implying a return that was confirmed when Phonolith replied to a comment saying, "Give me a month." I have another gift. There was also another important event that occurred related to this post, which was the return of OwlEffigy with a comment demonstrating how the QR code was derived from this post. It had been about 7.5 months since OwlEffigy's advice post, so the return of the two most prolific accounts in r/Fez seemed inevitable. OwlEffigy didn't take long to have their return, as they finally made a new post after nearly 8 months, on February 12, 2014. The image attached to this post is a bit overwhelming at first, especially if you're not familiar with Fez, since this image uses text written in the fictional Zooish language from Fez. Firstly, the leftmost text says, "Something from nothing," while the rightmost text says, "To explore is to live." There's more writing that blends in with the background somewhat, which together with what seems to be a pixelated torch reads, "Pass the torch." There's also a Morse code message written along the top border of the image, which translates to CT, X, Y, Z. This part of the image seems to relate to the graphs shown in the bottom left corner, where CT either refers to the Cartesian coordinate system, the most widely used coordinate system for mathematics, or it refers to a fourth dimension, which would likely be time. However, what these specific graphs mean isn't clear, especially thanks to the lack of fidelity the pixel art style provides. There wasn't much headway made on deciphering this image past this, though there may be a good reason why, which I'll get to soon. In the meantime, there's another gap in the timeline, this time of about 5 months, before Phonolith would make their final contribution to r/Fez on July 11th, 2014. The image provided is a 3D render of several blocks with a spotlight shining on the ground, and seemingly nothing else. At the surface level, there's nothing else to really pull from this image, and my own research a bit below the surface level showed nothing else either. The comments under this new post were excited to see Phonolith return, but they also considered this as filler before something else would be released, as the content of the post was quite rudimentary compared to their first gift. But as I said before, this is the last post on Phonolith's Reddit profile, and the account remains inactive to this day. It's not entirely clear whether or not this was the second gift that Phonolith alluded to, though I doubt we'll ever know for sure. About a month later, on August 8th, 2014, we would also receive the final word from OwlEffigy in the form of a comment. It was reminiscent of the advice post in how OwlEffigy dropped their mysterious facade, though they went even further with this comment by admitting to the role they played for the subreddit, stating that Phonolith and myself were just trying to keep the dream alive. This comment leaves it up to interpretation as to whether or not their claims about having solved the monolith in the advice post were part of the facade, though they do also endorse the release date theory as the true solution. As for PolybiusCube, their final contribution would surprisingly come 4 whole years later, in 2018. It was a simple, straightforward explanation of an oversight found in the final area of the game, without any sort of cryptic flair. So since 2014, none of these 3 accounts have posted anything substantial, and while discussion of their posts would carry on to some extent, we've now reached the end of their story. When the activity of these accounts is taken in their totality, it seems like an open and shut case when it comes to the nature of the mysteries they set up. Each one would, at one point or another, eventually break character and either implicitly or explicitly state that they were just making their own puzzles for the love of the game and the sense of community they fostered. If there's a common thread to be followed between these 3 accounts, it's one that's similar to what I took away from Fez in my original video about the game. You probably won't find definitive answers for the loose ends that these puzzles leave open, but is that such a bad thing? It's putting emphasis on the journey by denying even the most basic conclusion, and with the right combination of factors, as we've seen with the monolith and the Heartbreak Secret, the simple goal of searching for that conclusion can drive discussion for a practically infinite amount of time. The common theme, whether it's found in Phonolith's frustrated comment following their gift, or in the motif of Fez being our gift to you, found in both OwlEffigy and PolybiusCube's post histories, is that this community should be happy that discussion around this relatively niche indie game could survive for this long, and the real genius of this game is how it can entertain for so long by encouraging that discussion. That idea still rings true over 10 years after they made their final departure from the subreddit, as users continue to post speculation on the monolith and Fez's other mysteries to this day. Furthermore, assuming we can take them at their word when they break character, it's fair to say that these accounts are not officially connected to Fez's developers in any way, despite this being a popular theory as they were posting. This is even more clear with respect to Phonolith, since, if you put cmd.swf through a Flash decompiler, there are strings found within that refer to a Windows user file path with a name that doesn't correspond with any Fez developer. But given OwlEffigy's interest in passing the torch, and both Phonolith and PolybiusCube seemingly leaving their puzzles incomplete, it's far more likely that the people behind these accounts were just fans who ran these small-scale ARG-esque puzzles before eventually growing bored and moving on. So in all likelihood, it's all just one of those things that doesn't mean anything. This is a bit of an anticlimax, but as I briefly alluded to at the beginning of this video, I'm not just here to discuss these 3 false prophets. There may or may not be a 4th figure in this story that has never broken character, and who has a slightly better chance of being someone more directly connected to Fez. This whole time, I've been leaving one theory about OwlEffigy specifically out of this discussion, since it opens another entire can of worms. The OwlEffigy Reddit account was created in June of 2013, just over a month after the OwlEffigy YouTube channel would post its last video. That may lead you to believe that OwlEffigy moved from YouTube to Reddit to continue their cryptic puzzles, but it's important to ask, how do we know these 2 accounts were made by the same person? The answer, from all that I've gathered in my research, is that we don't know at all. The OwlEffigy Reddit account could easily be someone who adopted the name to garner more attention to their posts by relating themselves to an existing mysterious figure. So although we don't know if they actually exist separately from the owner of the Reddit account, this hypothetical 4th figure is the OwlEffigy YouTube channel. Although I glossed over them before, the 4 videos made by OwlEffigy have a few things worth commenting on. Firstly, it should be investigated whether or not OwlEffigy had advanced knowledge of any secrets found within the game when compared to the broader community of players, as that could bolster the theory that this account is a sock puppet for the developers who have that insider knowledge. The first video is actually very interesting in this regard, as the room shown doesn't actually exist in the game. It seems to be a mashup of 2 existing rooms, the room where the 4 owls meet on the trees that Gomez is standing on in the video, and the room with the larger owl statue that's entered after the aforementioned room. Considering the flawless continuity of the rain particles in the background, it's unlikely that this was done through stitching together 2 videos, though there are other possibilities. It's important to remember that this video was released about 2 weeks after Fez first released exclusively on Xbox Live Arcade, while in the modern day you could probably use some modding tools for Fez to stitch these 2 rooms together on the PC version. This was practically impossible within just weeks of the game's initial console release. Instead, as we'll see in OwlEffigy's other videos, this channel uses several pieces of material from the early development of Fez. Although there doesn't seem to be definitive proof of this, it's entirely possible that this video clip was taken from a brief teaser for Fez that shows an older version of these 2 rooms, as this sort of bite-sized video showing the game's expressive art and perspective tricks was a big part of Fez's marketing appeal. This is the theory of a user who commented under a post pointing out this inconsistency, though the other possibility is that the OwlEffigy channel is actually connected to the Fez developers, which allowed them access to the development tools to make changes to the room easily. However, the other videos are much easier to explain in comparison. The second video simply consists of the camera zooming into a still image, eventually focusing on a dark silhouette of Gomez with red eyes. This may seem very creepypasta-esque at first, but both the character and this entire screenshot is actually taken from a very early version of Fez. The original image can be found within a Dropbox repository of early development material for Fez that is linked in the description. The third video is similar in this regard, with the room and the silhouette of Gomez not appearing in the final game, though it's different with respect to how this room was discovered. Rather than being a part of the game's early development that was scrapped, this room was found in the game's files by an asset ripping project that began on September 24, 2012. This GameFAQs thread would be updated as more unused assets were found, with one of them being rgbroom.xmb. This is where the terrain of OwlEffigy's third video comes from, with that video releasing on September 29th, just days after the asset ripping project found the unused image. The character was obviously placed in the scene on top of the base image, though this character is slightly different from the previous video, looking more like the inverted color version of Gomez seen at the end of the game, rather than the red-eyed silhouette from the dev screenshot. OwlEffigy's final video, Mared, has one particular moment near the beginning that will stick out to those familiar with Fez's unsolved mysteries, which are the concentric squares. After collecting the first-person glasses from reaching New Game Plus, you can find markings on the floors of certain areas which are only visible in first person. There are as many as 8 squares found in a single area, but the variant with 4 squares can't be found through normal means. This is because that specific marking is found in this room, which doesn't allow the first-person view to be used, but the 4 squares can be verified to exist there by viewing the level's model through external tools. In Mared, Gomez is seen jumping in this room, implying that the video is pointing towards the concentric squares, though they aren't jumping directly over the actual location of the squares, which is lower down in the room. Additionally, not only did the PC port of Fez come out just days before Mared's release, which greatly eased the difficulties of data mining from a console, the existence of the concentric squares in this room was already being discussed in the aforementioned GameFAQs thread about the asset ripping project, after the asset for the squares was found in connection to this room. Another thing to note is that one of OwlEffigy's comments under this episode of a Fez Let's Play is an outlier in terms of what comments they left on other videos, as it was a set of exact instructions on how to trigger the Heartbreak secret. This comment has the most potential to clearly show advanced knowledge on the part of OwlEffigy, since this secret was totally hidden until the PC port was data mined, but this video and the comment below it were both posted on May 3rd, 2013, the exact same day that the first GameFAQs thread cataloging its existence was made. Checking the exact timestamps of each relevant post shows that the video was posted about 12 hours after the GameFAQs thread, with OwlEffigy's comment coming several hours after that. So while there's still a chance that OwlEffigy is connected to the Fez developers, their lack of advanced knowledge with respect to things like the RGB room, the concentric squares, and the Heartbreak secret makes that prospect seem less likely. In all likelihood, the owner of the account was just monitoring the Fez GameFAQs boards, waiting for new discoveries to be made, ready to make allusions to them in their videos and comments. But we also have to keep in mind that this isn't definitive proof against this theory. The other very interesting part of these videos is the audio. While the first video uses the track Death from the official Fez soundtrack, the other 3 videos feature music found outside of the soundtrack, though they definitely fit in with the style and instrumentation of the Fez OST. Some users on r/Fez seem to believe that OwlEffigy made these songs themselves, which may actually be partially true. Feeding the 3 songs into Shazam reveals some things that appear to be undocumented as of now, though I admittedly may have missed something in my research. The second video does turn up a result when fed into Shazam, which is a song called Venus by T-Vex. This appears to be a very obscure artist, though Shazam is still able to find the song on Apple Music and YouTube. But the 2 other videos are different in this regard, as Shazam is unable to find any links to the songs. It does, however, identify them, with both being by an artist called Hexatron, and both songs sharing the name of the OwlEffigy video they feature in. Directly looking up Hexatron in Shazam shows an artist with only one track called Cubism, though it's unclear whether or not this is the same artist, since the other songs don't appear. So who is Hexatron? Are they the owner of the OwlEffigy YouTube channel? And if they aren't, then why can't their songs be found outside of OwlEffigy's videos? I'll close out this discussion by mentioning something I was only made aware of very recently by a user in my Discord server. Just before Phil Fish announced the cancellation of Fez 2 and his departure from the games industry, the Polytron servers were compromised in a targeted attack. Under a normal post in r/Fez asking about the monolith from under a year ago, a user claimed that this hack actually revealed the monolith's true solution through the leaking of internal documents. The supposed solution stated in this document was that the monolith was meant to be either brute forced, or the answer would be communicated by the developers in some unspecified way. This fits in with Phil Fish's statement on the monolith in his 10th anniversary interview with Eurogamer, where he describes the brute force method as way more interesting and satisfying than what we had originally intended for it. However, unless the existence and validity of this supposed leaked document can be verified, which I strongly discourage searching for since it is hacked material obtained illegitimately. This should be taken with a grain of salt. On the other hand, the idea that the developers would make a spectacle of revealing the monolith code is one that makes a lot of sense with the context of how Fez was marketed through social media, which is a role that the OwlEffigy YouTube channel easily could have filled. After the monolith was quickly brute forced, some of the material that would have been planned for this ARG-esque event may have been slowly drip-fed onto YouTube through OwlEffigy as cryptic little art projects that leave just enough up to the imagination to let speculation run wild in Fez's player base. This theory is highly suspect due to the other factors I pointed out about OwlEffigy's videos, but just the possibility of a more interesting story behind the account's creation is so tantalizing to think about. I do need to bring things back down to reality though. It's a lot of fun to discover more of these questions and come up with more theories that we could pile up forever, but it's also important to realize that those questions will probably never be answered however deep you dig into this story, and that the answers to those questions are probably far less interesting than the wild speculation you can make. I'm not making this video to encourage anyone to investigate these mysteries, not just because these investigations aren't really my area of expertise and I don't want to send anyone to do so irresponsibly, but also because there's probably not a point to doing so regardless. The overwhelmingly likely reality behind these mysterious figures is simply that they're fan-made art projects and ARGs, made to give those who loved Fez for its own iconic mysteries something more to chew on. And in my research, I was happy to see people who truly appreciated these accounts for what they probably are, rather than what they're probably not. OwlEffigy's videos, particularly Mared, are still really interesting to watch, partially because of their cryptic nature, and partially because of the surface-level visuals and tone that are executed quite well. Additionally, if you look at the relatively huge number of comments found underneath Phonolith's first gift, there's a clear feeling of excitement exuding from the experience of digging into more cryptic puzzles, even from those who acknowledge the reality that it probably is just another fan of Fez making this. All throughout the comments about these 4 accounts, there are people coming up with crazy theories about the deeper meaning behind the account names or the minutiae of their posts, and that's really what I found so interesting about Fez and the community that still thinks about this game to this day. Despite being so simple on the surface, this is what makes these cryptic accounts so intriguing and captivating. So if the owners of any of these accounts happen to watch this video after over a decade of inactivity, I think you should be very happy with the impression you left on those who followed your posts and participated in discussion around them. For me personally, it made for a very interesting story to look back on and catalog, and I hope it was just as interesting for the uninitiated.